So I want to introduce at first our panel. We will have 1 hour and 30 minutes because we are talking about science in education, innovations, and I think we will have a very complex and comprehensive overview of these things. So first, I want to introduce Kei Koizumi, who is Principal Deputy Director for Science, Society and Policy at the White House Office for Science and Technology Policy. He's a long-time science policy leader, science policy researcher, and social scientist in Washington, D.C. Thank you for coming. Then I want to introduce Chirag Parikh, Deputy Assistant to the President and Executive Secretary at National Space Council. Mr. Chirag Parikh was appointed by the President on August 2nd, 2021. As Executive Secretary, he is responsible for advising the Vice President in her role as Chair of the National Space Council on developing national policies and strategies across the civil, commercial, and national security sectors. Then I want to introduce Roman Kachur, who is alternate executive director representing Ukraine, also in World Bank Group. Also, Roman was spent some time in Ministry of Finance of Ukraine and Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. It's a very important, point of view for science education, as we all know. Also, I want to introduce Gregory Symmes, who is Chief Program Officer and Acting Chief Operating Officer at the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Those of you who were yesterday already know about exciting announcement Marcia McNutt made yesterday. Others, I hope, will know today. As Chief Program Officer, Greg oversees the 7 program divisions that carry out studies, workshops, and other advisory and convening activities and minister research, fellowship, and grant programs, in addition to the Report Review Committee and Office for Congressional and Government Affairs. Also, I want to introduce David Draper, who is Deputy Chief Scientist at NASA. He joined the office from NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. He served as the manager of the Astromaterials Research Office, Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division, Exploration Integration and Science Directorate from June 2009 and to June 2019. These are very important words, even if we do not understand them even. In this role, he led a group of world-class planetary scientists specializing in the study of samples from other worlds to determine how the solar system formed and evolved to its present state. Anna Novosad. Anna has been a Minister of Education and Science in Ukraine in 2019, 2020. She is co-founder of a very important initiative, Save AD, and I hope to hear today more about this. Also, Dr. Carol O'Donnell, who is Senior Executive and Director of the Smithsonian Science Education Sector, dedicated to transforming K-12 education through science in collaboration with communities across the globe. Carol serves on numerous boards and committees, including the Inter-Academy Partnership Science Education Global Council, the Global Network of National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, the UN Broadband Commission Working Group on School Connectivity and Digital Learning, and many others. Carol has expertise in K-12 education policy, having served as a leader at the US Department of Education. And also Carol now having very interesting things with Ukraine. So, this is our distinguished panel. We will start now and we will try to cover 2 questions. I hope we will have enough time and also for Q&A, but if not, I hope we will answer these questions during the coffee break after. So I want to start with the question, and if possible, Kei, I would be happy to hear you first. The following thing. So we are having this event called Ukraine Reinvent, Innovate, Leapfrog, and we are talking about science education now. What role do you envision of science, education, innovations in overcoming Ukraine today's complex situation in the midst of war? Why we need to talk about this, why it's strategically important, why we need to do something starting from today, please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, the opportunity to be here with you today. And on behalf of the White House Office of Science Technology Policy, I want to say that, we are honored to be here. It's important for us to be here, for all U.S. scientists, innovators, engineers, and technologists to be with here and standing with the people of Ukraine. And as you know, we in the United States continue to express in the strongest possible terms our condemnation of Russia's further invasion of Ukraine And we stand with the science community and indeed all of the people of Ukraine. I'm happy that we are here today because we do need to. It's the job of science and technology and education to think about the future. There is a bright future for Ukraine, and we do need to think about how to reinvent, to innovate, and to leapfrog. And for the United States, this is it's a role that we are used to in our domestic context and also in international context. Because in this administration, we are thinking domestically about how science, technology, and education can, of course, further continue the spirit of US innovation and enable some of the communities that have traditionally been left behind in past economic growth to leapfrog to new opportunities and new ways in which we can use education to give more American people possibilities. And that goes hand in hand with our global efforts over the years to make sure that science, technology, and education offer opportunities for lesser developed nations for a long time to leapfrog innovation steps in order to build capacity to participate more fully in our global system. And those lessons, both on the development front and on the domestic front, I'm sure will be useful in determining the future of Ukraine. We're delighted that the Ukrainian embassy joined us last fall for our American Possibilities, a White House demo day. It was in that event and dialogues since then that we've been able to exchange ideas of how breakthrough advances in science and technology can help both of our nations cooperate more fully together. We recognize that, of course, science, innovation, and education has to play a large role to help Ukraine move forward. Because we know that science and technology are tools that help us open the doors to the future and what's possible. We need science, technology, and of course, educated citizenry in both countries to inform decisions that we have to make now and in the near future, from how we aid the health of Ukrainian warriors and people in Ukraine, to understanding the long-term environmental impacts of what is happening now, including destroyed ecosystems and hazardous air quality. And so it's also scientific and technological innovation that's helping brave Ukrainians defend the land from the Russian invaders. And science technology is essential now and will be more essential in the future as we help reshape Ukraine's economy away from former reliance on natural resources, which have become very precarious, obviously, in this current town. We also know that education is going to take time, and that's why I'm really pleased that I'm not going to give a full answer to your question now, because I have my federal agency partners here who are going to describe the many ways in which our US federal government is doubling down on education programs to make sure that we provide the resources and experiences and opportunities for Ukrainian learners of all ages to continue their education, to have additional education opportunities, and to connect them with the science and technology needs that Ukraine is going to face going forward.
Thank you, Kei, for these brilliant remarks. And I think especially thank you for bringing up advisory role, which is important today. It won't wait for future. Thank you. Mr. Chirag, can I ask you add to this question? I won't repeat it, but...
We haven't practiced this yet. So, well, first, Yulia, thank you very much to everybody, to our allies and partners in both the industry of Ukraine as well as the government of Ukraine. And this is, I think my comments will reflect the opportunity where we can bring some of our worlds together. My name is Chirag Parikh, as the Executive Secretary of the National Space Council. Our job is to be able to look at the intersection of civil, commercial, and security sectors in space, and not just within the United States, but also as part of our international alliances. Last December, Vice President Harris, as the chair of the National Space Council, convened an entire National Space Council meeting exclusively focused on international partnerships. And that goes to show two things. One is the commitment that this administration has to be able to say space is a global language and we need to learn and partner together and ally together. And two, the acknowledgement that space is a global industry, it's a global capacity along the way. And so as we think about things such as how can we enable the partnership with respect to science and innovation and education, boy, when you think about space, you think about science, you think about innovation, and you think about the inspiration that space provides for people to go into STEM career fields, into scientific and technical competent industries along the way. But space also enables, and we'll talk about this more so as well in the second part of the questions, it enables our workforce, it enables our economy, it enables jobs as well. And what's really great about speaking here about U.S.-Ukrainian alliance is both of our nations are deeply rooted in space history. The Ukrainian government has had a long history of the development of rockets and of satellites. Furthermore, I had to look the statistic up. There have been 20 Ukrainians who have either been born in Ukraine or have Ukrainian heritage who have been in space. Now, about 15 of them have been part of the cosmonaut program in the Soviet Union. 4 of them are Ukrainian American, and 1 has actually been with the Ukrainian flag on orbit. And I know there's a lot of great pride in our US astronaut corps as well as the Ukrainian astronaut corps, and we see opportunities hopefully in the future where we can continue that capability. But as we think about space, before we think about forward, think about how space today is absolutely critical to what's happening in the sea, air, and ground of Ukraine. Space technology plays an absolutely critical role in all elements of society, whether you know it or you're not, or whether you care about it or you don't. Space is a critical enabler. It connects our societies. It allows us to plan our infrastructures. It enables a high-tech workforce, as I talked about, and it provides us for security. And lest we forget, Russia is quite aware of this as well. And the dependence our societies have on space, as well as the dependence that we have and the need that we have for space for our security. Think about the fact that commercial satellites were able to image the amassing of troops on the Russia-Ukraine border now years ago. Think about the fact that now with satellites hundreds of kilometers in space, we're able to see the atrocities happening firsthand, not just from eyewitness accounts, but the macroscopic scale of things that are happening along the way. Think about the fact that communication satellites are able to connect our societies. One of the first attacks that were conducted were not kinetic attacks, but they were cyber attacks on US satellite communication companies to be able to take down the connectivity infrastructure to enable society and military operations. And of course, I think we all know about the ubiquity of GPS, from our ability to navigate as well as have targeting operations along the way. So it's very clear that today, as we speak right now, space is a very critical element of things. But coming to the question and to the theme of what we're talking about here, it has so much opportunity that I think can help inform where we want to go. And hopefully, as we discuss at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Berlin, space can be one element of that. And that's why we're really proud and happy that not have 1, but 2 people talking about space. It's an enabler of so much more than just astronauts along the way. Think about it from an environmental perspective. Kei brought it up for just a second. We can assess damage from space. And all the different ways in which we can monitor capabilities from space, from remote sensing satellites. You think about locations of minefields and unexploded ordnance along the way. That's going to really help us think about how we can help farmers and the agriculture industry quickly come back to bear, as well as be able to partition off areas that are not safe for humans currently to be moving forward. we talk about the fact of there is a still fantastic workforce in Ukraine, and yet we at the same time have this great workforce in the United States. How do we bring them together? How do we use space to inspire the next generation along the way? And then also from an accountability perspective, the State Department has an office called the Conflict Observatory to capture and analyze evidence of war crimes and other atrocities that have been conducted by Russia and Ukraine. And we can use space services to be able to enable capabilities along the way. And so that, and then furthermore, our partnership with our private sector really has the opportunity to really use space as a multiplier to be able to achieve a lot of the geopolitical, domestic opportunities and initiatives that both of our nations have along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parikh. And I can say you definitely for many kids, space was or is an inspiration to start pursue scientific careers for me too. And yes, today I think many kids and many young people, they see how space can help Ukraine to win. Thank you very much. Roman, now perspective of your World Bank experience you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Roman Kachur. I represent Ukraine at the World Bank Group. Also, the World Bank carries the word bank in its name. It's not only about financing, but it's a lot about the knowledge. So along with the more than 130 billion of financing the bank disbursed last year, it did a lot of technical assistance and knowledge transfer support to all countries across the world. And Ukraine is not exception. World Bank supported Ukraine from the day one, both in knowledge and financing. And first, let me mention about the Ukraine aspirations and future. Despite fighting against the Russia's aggression in Ukraine, Ukraine has an aspiration to become a member of the European Union. And to become a member of European Union, Ukraine needs economic growth. Because if we look back, the current Ukrainian income per capita is around 20% of EU average. And the country which was admitted to the EU with the lowest per capita income was Romania, with about 40% of EU average back in 2004. So that means that Ukraine would need to at least double its income per capita to become a member of the European Union. So how we can do this during the time of war and then the challenges Ukraine is facing right now? And basically there is a lot of serious, Bank has said, there was knowledge about that, the classical total factor gross productivity says that we need capital, we need labor, and we need technology for the country to grow. So World Bank mobilized for Ukraine about 42 billion since the full-scale invasion, and 36 billion was disbursed. We are one of the largest financiers. It's not the World Bank money, but it's a global mobilization platform pretty much for all partners, and we are very grateful to generosity of all donors. But also, Ukraine needs a better efficiency, the knowledge how we can use this capital. And it has a very practical application even these days, because Ukraine is fighting the war. It's outnumbered by Russia, both in weapon, in troops. The only way we can resist is to do the things smarter. And Ukraine proved it can do things smarter. If we look on the Black Sea was blocked from the day one, basically, of the full-scale invasion. The Snake Island was overtaken. And then gradually, Ukraine started to fight back, sinking the Moscow ship in April 2022, then gradually sinking more and more ships. And one can ask how we could do this, not having a single navy in the Russian Sea, in the Black Sea, and still fighting back and restoring the trade corridor. And the trade corridor, restoring the trade corridor, to be able to export the grain and iron ore, steel products, is absolutely vital for economic growth for Ukraine. It's a foreign currency, it's jobs, it's growth for Ukrainian companies. So now Ukraine is able to basically restore the exports of grain to the level of pre-war, just because of the bright minds of Ukrainians who were able to come up with the merge of knowledge, innovation, and practical application of this knowledge to make a sea drones that are now defending the Black Sea and helping the Ukraine economy to grow and to preserve jobs. Now, this capacity of Ukraine and the research overall, unfortunately, remains quite limited, and its historical legacy due to limited knowledge of English and other foreign languages, and also Ukrainian higher education do produce some research output. It's primarily, unfortunately, only on the STEM fields, and we need to expand it further. And the existing facilities in higher education institutions are outdated, depreciated, or even absent. They require significant investments to deliver and the growth further. So the World Bank decided to support, and all this was exacerbated by the COVID in 2020 with a very significant impact on education and science. And even during COVID, the World Bank decided to intervene and to support Ukrainian education and science with the 200 million project. The project was focused to support the higher education institutions in Ukraine, to improve the strategic investments, to improve the equipment, to support the merger and better efficiency of this institution, also to support and create the electronic system and better allocation of funds from the budget from which the government of Ukraine provides to achieve a better efficiency. Unfortunately, the invasion continues, and the recent Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment report, it's a third one that Ukraine, the World Bank did for Ukraine, identified almost 5.6 billion losses, just direct damages to the Ukrainian educational institutions. And the total damages account for more than 150 billion US dollars. But rebuilding these damages, we want to do them not in an old-fashioned way. We need to build a modern institution. So we will need more than $480 billion to rebuild the damages caused by the Russia invasions. And obviously, we'll need a lot of innovation. We will need a lot of knowledge how we can do it in the most efficient, sustainable way. You mentioned the climate smart and the way that it can serve the better future for our people. So we decided to continue supporting Ukraine, and I'm happy to announce that based on the request of the Ukrainian government, the World Bank acknowledged and confirmed that they will support Ukraine with another project, a 200 million project called LEARN. Still subject to the approval by the World Bank, but it's now under full preparation, and we expect it to be ready by end of summer and start disbursing to support the Ukrainian education. So we will stand with Ukraine as a bank. We will continue support financially and in the knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I apologize. We are having a spring meeting of the World Bank and IMF. Busy agenda there, so I unfortunately will have to leave this panel.
Thank you,
so
Roman.
much.
Yeah, we need money, as you've heard, so we need to allow you to do your job. Yeah, but I think it's a very important message that World Bank is thinking not only about helping Ukraine with humanitarian needs, but also thinking about this education, science, and other very important things. So, Greg, now I ask you to reflect on this question.
Right. Well, thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here on behalf of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and following up the discussion we had yesterday with Marcia McNutt, the NAS president. So when I think about, obviously Ukraine faces significant challenges in science and technology, but it also can build on its longstanding strengths in science. We all know of the tragedy of what's happened in some of the major science facilities throughout the country, and especially in Kharkiv. And we at the Academies are aware of the challenges the war has created for many in the scientific workforce of Ukraine. And undoubtedly, the internal and external displacements of colleagues and the destruction of facilities create complex challenges in the short, medium, and long term. But even under these very challenging circumstances, we've seen how Ukraine has been able to marshal science and technology, when we've heard it earlier, to strengthen its national security, from drones to AI. We've watched in real time as Ukrainians are using their tremendous resources in math and data and analytics to the country's advantage. And obviously, hopefully this will continue. But as we've heard repeatedly in this event, we also know that in the longer term, it'll be critical for Ukraine to not only build on its national security, but also to build its economic security. And based on our own experience in the United States, we know that science and innovation are critical components to overcome the challenges. As we heard yesterday from Marcia McNutt, science is hope. And key economic sectors for Ukraine, energy, agriculture, green manufacturing, AI and infrastructure, they all depend on innovation and discovery, scientific discovery, as well as a trained workforce. So I'm confident that science and innovation will provide a powerful pathway for Ukraine to strengthen its connections with countries throughout Europe and in North America, which will in return benefit tremendously from that cooperation. And I thought I'd close with just a short story about our own experience with the academies in the U.S. During the height of our Civil War, when it was not clear whether the United States would continue as a single country, President Abraham Lincoln continued. He had a vision for the future of the country, and he saw science as a core part of ensuring that future. He created land-grant colleges and universities so that research in agriculture should help propel the American agricultural economy. He invested in the Transcontinental Railroad to connect the entire nation and to promote commerce and economic development. And he also had the vision to create the U.S. National Academy of Sciences so that the nation's leaders could have access to the best science to move forward both its national security and economic productivity. So thank you.
Greg, for this inspiring example. I think it's bringing hope for us too. And about damaged research infrastructure, we know that already more than 30% of Ukrainian research infrastructure is being damaged or ruined. You will have an opportunity to visit in Ukraine House after this panel, Science at Risk. You will see photos about these ruined institutions, but you will see people who are resilient enough to preserve this science, to proceed doing this science, and having this hope for the future of Ukraine, where science is important. Thank you so much. Please, Dr. Draper, I will be happy to hear your remarks on this. We are again in space.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an honor to be part of this conversation. It's an especial honor to be part of this distinguished panel. Which one doesn't belong? That's me for sure. I understand that it may sound a little hollow, some of the things I'm going to say, because I'm going to talk about some of the hopeful, aspirational kinds of things. But before I do, I want to follow upon what Chirag said a few minutes ago, talking about satellites in space and how Ukraine has a long history of progress there. In addition to the types that have already been mentioned, NASA operates a fleet of low Earth orbit and higher Earth orbit satellites, particularly in conjunction with NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, that is really important for agriculture to recover in Ukraine. We use it here in the United States. Farmers are able to access real-time information in real time to make decisions they have to make this week about which field am I going to plant that crop in. That information is available to all. Like everything that NASA does, we release all of our information to everybody because that's what NASA does. We're in it for the benefit of all. And so this is to talk about leapfrogging. You know, I'm sure there are parts of the Ukrainian countryside where people have been doing farming in the same way for quite some time, centuries perhaps. This is a way when understanding what kind of information is now readily available. And we heard from the cities panel before this about the need for connectivity. Obviously, that's crucial. You can't know what the data are unless you have a connection. But this is a way, I mean, as the nation is going to rebuild from the war that it is experiencing now, it's going to be crucial to feed everybody. And so we have to start with some of these most basic things. And the fleet of satellites we have now can help do that. But I also want to come back to the primary question that we're focusing on here, and that is, why should we worry about things like education and STEM and science? We're at war. And of course, my gut reaction to this is, no matter how you got into the bad situation you're in, natural disaster, warfare, whatever, and you're starting a rebuilding process, the foundation of what you're doing is critically important, both physically and in the societal sense. And that's what STEM education and science and innovation does. It helps build that new foundation for the Ukraine of the future. I'll have a few more things to say about hope when we get to our second question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Draper. Can't say anything. We absolutely on the same page here. And I think you said you do not maybe belong to this panel. I would say you definitely, we do not have anyone here who thinks other way. So now I would like to ask Anna Novosad to share her perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. Very appreciative being here, being invited, and glad to bring a bit of a mix to this, a bit of a gender not balance, but a bit of change, but also just turn us a bit from science and higher education to what's going on in school education. A few words on myself. I live in Ukraine. I work in Ukraine together with colleagues. We run a charity called Safe Ed, and our mission is to restore access to education. It might not be evident to everyone, at least the level of details and the level of scale. Russia is very deliberately, very systemically, and I'm pretty sure in a very planned manner is targeting schools, particularly schools, well, universities as well, vocational institutions. However, by today, Russia has either destroyed completely or damaged very seriously every seventh school in our country out of 14,000 that we had before the big war. Regions like Kharkiv region have more than 50% of schools gone. Mykolaiv region that has been freed after Kherson was liberated, experienced, if I'm not mistaken, 290 or something institutions that have been either damaged or completely erased from Earth by Iskander, IRL bombs, and so on and so forth. So that all fits very well into the general strategy of Russia to eliminate us as a nation and to destroy it in the very long term our human capital. And that goes along with the kidnapping of the Ukrainian kids, of forbidding Ukrainian language, destroying textbooks on the occupied territories, so on and so forth. So for us, it's not a pathetic thing anymore, preserving education as part of that. We will never outnumber Russians, not military, I mean, but just regular people who will most probably always hate us and always want us to be gone. We are less than, 28 million at this moment. And the only thing we can do is to outsmart Russians. And that is unfortunately not happening at this very moment. Because behind this 7 schools, these are just physical buildings, I understand. And by the way, we do not need to rebuild every single one. We will talk about that later. But behind those numbers are real stories of people. And this September, just imagine, all of you lived through COVID. Those of you who have kids experienced that, you know how fun it is when online learning happens for years. It will be the 5th September in Ukraine when millions of kids, and in particular 1.8 million of school children only out of 4 will go to either online only mode or to the blended mode of schooling only. So roughly half of the country. We can see the results that it already brings. Last year we had, the whole world saw the PISA results, right? well, everyone knows what PISA is. It's like an Oscar in the world of education. But what's most important, you measure yourself 4 years ago. And what we see on the PISA this time, the cycle encompassed obviously all the COVID time, but in Ukraine's case, not only 9 months of the big war. And we see that, for instance, STEM, knowledge and competences in STEM, in sciences, they dropped for around a year of academic learning. So this last year, 15-year-old Ukrainians know sciences worse than they used to 4 years ago for one academic year. But the worst, we were surprised that the worst figures are actually in reading. The reading dropped tremendously, more than 1.5 academic years, and it means that Ukrainian school children, 15-year-olds, can hardly, well, for example, discern facts and truths from Russian propaganda, and media literacy is, being a problem. So this continuous online learning and very much, hampered learning in general for half of the country is already a huge problem. We work in 5 war-damaged regions. I travel myself a lot along the liberated areas. We can see the 5th graders, 6th graders who can hardly talk, who can hardly communicate. They do not know what teamwork is for a very simple reason. They are sitting at home for last couple of years, and they have no understanding when they will be able to be back to learning. And if someone says that providing Ukraine with devices is a solution, that's the wrong way to go. We have to look for ways. There's this word reinvent on that banner. Maybe we will come to innovation at some point, but reinventing what access means beyond just rebuilding schools, I think is very crucial thing for us at this moment. A few things, 2 more things to say. What we at Save Ed this year did a big research on 2 years of war and education. And in particular, we asked 15-year-olds in all accessible macro regions of Ukraine, what do they think about, how do they feel about their future in Ukraine? And the terrifying figure that we received is that only 52% of high schoolers, and high schoolers are those who make a choice what to do right now professionally, education-wise, they said that they want to stay in Ukraine. 26% say that they would leave, and 20 said that they are uncertain, right? So basically only half of Ukrainian school children or teenagers who are deciding where to go, what to do want to stay in Ukraine. And let's be honest, a lot of countries, starting from Germany, Czech Republic, you name it, they would like to have Ukrainian youth because these are well-educated people who can easily integrate. So it's a battle for us for every single school child, and we have to come up with innovative ways how to renew this access to education. And the last thing I would say, we have 500,000 Ukrainian school children children of school age abroad. And I know it also from my personal experience, from my friends, many women are deciding whether they want to return to Ukraine. Of course, security is the factor number 1, but the access to school or kindergarten that would have a bomb shelter is a key. And I don't really see that changing if we do not think about how to deal with access to education while the war is ongoing, and not thinking like how we will beautifully deal with it after the victory. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I think it's clearly we hear that Russia has theory about Ukrainian human capital erasing it and preventing us to have future. And also, I think there are a lot of challenges here which are really needing these innovating approaches. And I think it's really, we have in Ukraine a lot of expertise understanding what is going on the ground, but we need experts all over the world to think together. And we need then resources to try and to see what will work out. Thank you very much. Carol, please.
Thank you. So my name is Carol O'Donnell, and I'm the director of what's called the Smithsonian Science Education Center. And I just want to thank you for pulling this important panel together and for including education. And when I talk about education, I'm talking about early education in the conversation of building the science pipeline. So thank you. I just want to give a little bit of history and say a special thank you, of course, to the ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, to Marcia McNutt, who spoke yesterday, because it was the National Academy of Sciences and the Smithsonian that founded the organization I direct, called the Smithsonian Science Education Center, 40 years ago, so almost 40, in 1985. Why? Because the Reagan administration had just come out with a report called A Nation at Risk. And the reason that report was written was because the idea was that in order to become economically, globally competitive, the U.S. had to improve its educational system. And that included improving our teaching of science and technology. So a theme, I think, today has been, if you want to rebuild, and when we talk about rebuilding, we heard today, it's not just economically rebuild, physically, the infrastructure rebuilding, but also rebuilding our knowledge, our skills, and our human capital. And to do that, in 1985, what the Smithsonian and the National Academy of Sciences did was said, we have to improve curriculum in our earliest science learners and also improve professional development for teachers. Because if teachers, as you talked about, Anna, part of the work you're doing is not only making schools, certain schools can be physically in place and protected, but what happens inside of that school. And so our center has always worked under the premise that you could actually shift the pedagogical knowledge of teachers, give them the most advanced tools. We talk about leapfrogging, make certain that what is the most advanced pedagogical tools you can give to teachers, and what are the most important resources, as you just said, that you can give to teachers in classrooms so that they are supporting the building of knowledge and skills, competencies in science, technology, engineering, and math in an integrated way. And so in 2020, December, we met at the Smithsonian Institution's castle to meet with the ambassador and the then president and vice of what's called the Junior Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And those two individuals are now the minister and the deputy minister of science, of education and science in Ukraine. In that conversation in December of 2020, the question was, and this is pre-invasion, what could we do to build science education in Ukraine? And the question put to us from the ambassador was, we've been paying attention to what you're doing at the Smithsonian and the National Academies. Could we bring this to Ukraine? And of course, 2 months later, a month and a half later, everything changed. We lost touch. We were afraid for our friends and our new colleagues. Were they still alive? What might have happened to them? And thankfully, in a year, the conversation reemerged. And just a couple of months ago, at the embassy here in DC, we signed an agreement to give all of the curricular resources that the Smithsonian has spent 40 years building in collaboration with the National Academies initially, to Ukraine's Ministry of Education and Science so that we could build the skills and knowledge of the youngest learners. And I'm very pleased with that. But that's just the start. So there's this knowledge base that exists, this level of expertise that exists. But the hardest part, I think, is what you're doing, Anna. Like, how do you take that and actually make it happen and bring it to life in a very complex situation? We heard this morning that even during a natural disaster, and you mentioned that as well from NASA, or in a situation of war, it's very difficult because you're physically trying to protect students' lives, but you also don't want them at home, as you mentioned, Anna, learning online and only online. So the work that we're going to be doing over the next, I believe, 5 years, that's how long this agreement is to work together to translate the knowledge and expertise that exists both within Ukraine and the United States to work together to advance science education. So the last thing I'll mention before you go to your second question is why we would do that. So why is it in this conversation, and I'm going to pull up my notes because I want to make sure I get this right. Why is it in this conversation of reinvent, innovate, and leapfrog, is it so important that we include early learners in science education and science development? So I'm going to build on some of the things that came from the first panel. So there are basically 6 reasons why we need to do this, why early STEM education matters. So the first reason is an economic reason. And I think that's probably very clear to all of us, which is that if we take a pipeline view of science and the benefits of science to a country, OSTP is a great example, NASA, National Academy of Sciences, the goal is to produce more scientists and more engineers. And we need to produce innovation and wealth. Why? Because education is a form of economic and social mobility. And if we do that, then we'll put in place a curriculum that will help ensure that those PISA scores that Anna talked about actually improve over time. And that students are earning skills and degrees in STEM. The second argument for why early STEM learning is so important is a democratic argument. And that is that if we want to make certain that we're building a scientifically literate citizenry, then we need to prepare our students to be informed so that they are the future leaders of the country, but they're also making informed decisions as a citizen, whether it's environmental questions or not. The third argument is a skills argument. We need to make certain that the study of science results in the development of transferable skills. STEM careers are changing constantly, exponentially shifting. And if all we do is teach in a traditional way, in which we're teaching students science facts, those facts will change with new evidence, and our students will be left behind. And so the reason I think this panel is called Leapfrogging is because in the United States, we took a really long 40-year view about this and said, we want to change the way science is being taught. It's very didactic. People are using textbooks. They're just forcing facts on students. This was in 1985. We'll take a long-term 30 to 40-year view and we'll shift the pedagogy over time. Well, Ukraine doesn't have 30 to 40 years. So the idea is how do we leapfrog and bring those skills to them now? And then 3 more, which is a cultural argument, which considers the history and philosophy of science. We heard repeatedly today that we don't want to lose the cultural history of Ukraine. And that's not just restoring and securing their artifacts. It's also making certain that the knowledge of the history of science in Ukraine remains intact. And then to end, the social argument, which is society benefits from science. And then, of course, a utility argument. If you learn science, it will help you make better personal decisions. And ultimately, that's what we want in our earliest learners from the very beginning in order to build a very secure country that uses science, not just to protect itself, but also to be informed citizens.
Thank you, Carol. And I think early STEM education is especially important now because in Ukraine, we had a lot of people interested to pursue STEM careers after the Soviet Union because engineers, scientists, they were well known and a great way to use your lifetime. But after the independence, less and less children and students were looking at these careers. There were much more to do in the banking sector, finance, and so on, not in science, not in engineering. But now, many people realize, and parents of these children realize that it's not only career, it's not only workplace you will have, but it's essential for the country, to have these skills because you can be part of something very meaningful today. Thank you. And actually, before we will turn to the next question, I forgot one very important panelist because we have a huge and important panel. It's Oleksandr Skorokhod. He's working with me for 10 years in science and innovation policy in Ukraine. Also, he's a researcher himself. He's now one of the researchers in Science at Risk project I already mentioned, and a researcher at Stanford University. Please, Oleksandr.
Yes, thank you, Yulia, for this introduction. It's a really big pleasure for me to be here. Let me follow up our speakers and maybe tell a couple of points which wasn't mentioned yet. So first of all, as a scientist myself, I need to say that you can't born as a scientist. Yeah, you need to have a good education. To become scientist, you need to spend a lot of years in university and then hours in laboratory to become a really good scientist. That's why, of course, education is really ground base for science. And another point is that education actually really can be this hope and inspiration for Ukrainian children, which struggle now from this Russians attack from online learning for several years. So I think it is, of course, important to invest in Ukrainian education and to support different initiatives which restore schools and our educational capacity. Then I think we need to understand that, of course, science innovations, they can be very helpful to countries' growth. Yeah, and we know from some historical example, like South Korea, yes, that they were built and became economical leaders just within 30 years because of investing in science and innovations and education. But now Ukrainian science face a lot of challenges, starting from that before the war, actually, Ukrainian science just started its transformation. Actually, it was started after Revolution of Dignity, and it is a great pleasure to see some people here who was involved in this process and who continue to do this. But it isn't done yet, so we have pretty old infrastructure before war. A lot of people come abroad, a lot of scientists come abroad, and we have a huge brain drain. Yeah, we need to, even before the war, we have a lot of troubles how to restore the scientific capacity and potential. But now we have ongoing challenges like ecological damages. We have a lot of mental issues, challenges, which was mentioned during a previous panel discussion about smart cities. Also, we need to think how to produce maybe more smart and powerful weapons, maybe how to make self-sufficient in producing missiles and other weapons. So, yeah, science can be helpful. And as a scientist, I see big potential in connecting our Ukrainian scientists now with our colleagues abroad. Because yes, we do not have infrastructure, for instance, but we can send our scientists abroad and they can learn how to use infrastructure and they can build some products. Also, we need to help our scientists to be connected with business in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, to create startups, to create some technical solutions, and maybe to create some solution in biomedical fields, for instance. So yeah, in mid-term and long-term perspective, I think we need to invest, first of all, in our human capital, in Ukrainian human capital. We need to save as many scientists as we can. And that's why the initiative of National Academy of Sciences here in US is very great. And I hope yeah, we will have even more initiatives and even more support to do this. And I have a big hope that a lot of scientists, Ukrainian scientists, who due to the war fled out Ukraine, they can come back. And probably with this potential, with this capital, we can do this so-called leapfrogging in human capital. Because, you know, when someone who already know a lot of how to use some very smart tools, who know some methodology, they can very easily and much more faster establish and help to restore Ukrainian science. And restoring Ukrainian science, we of course can restore Ukrainian economy and to build better country. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandr. So we discussed space, soil, missiles, children at schools, early STEM education. We covered a lot, and I think it's because it's a complex question, and we see how science and how education is everywhere in today's Ukraine life, and how it's inevitable part of its future, and how we, like, I think everyone can find a place to support this. Now we will have the second question, which much more focused. Already many of you mentioned what your organizations are doing. I will pose it that way. What is your theory of change under what you are doing? Why are you doing this, not something else? Why you think that today, in this, when it's war and we need to concentrate resources, our time, prioritize, why it is important to do what you are doing? And what is the role of international cooperation? We already mentioned science. It's something which is very global. And really, Ukrainian full-scale war with Russia is already a global war, yeah? What is the role which can help to pursue these goals you are seeing in the theory of change? How this international cooperation should be structured to make us closer in this short time we have? Kei, please.
Well, I'm happy we are able to talk about some of the international cooperation because, as we've already heard, science is a global enterprise. And we are also in a global situation, as President Biden has put it repeatedly. What is at stake is democracy itself. We need to be able to show that democracies are vital, that they can deliver for our people, and that democracies are strong. And especially in this time when we have, two democratic nations against an undemocratic, even anti-democratic system. I mean, the stakes are higher. So that is, one element of, what we are dealing with here within a global scientific community. We know the statistics about the growing number of international research collaborations. So in terms of supporting those, we have to pay special attention right now to the ability of Ukrainian researchers to determine their own destinies. And to make the choices that work for them. And so in our federal government programs, that is the vision. Now it's not our job as the United States to dictate where Ukrainian researchers should be or what kinds of research they should do. Or rather, we know that some Ukrainian researchers, despite very extremely challenging conditions, are still in Ukraine trying to do research and education. We also know that some Ukrainian researchers have left Ukraine and are doing what we hope end up being temporary positions and temporary research projects. Others are looking at more extended stays outside the Ukraine. So I think we see our job is supporting Ukrainian researchers in not only maintaining but expanding their scientific and research capabilities on all of these topics and more that we've talked about. And that demands from us, more of a spirit of partnership and letting Ukrainian scientists lead in articulating what they need to be able to be full participants in a global research community. So as the executive director of our U.S. National Science and Technology Council, I'd like to take this moment to highlight a recent report to our Congress on international science and technology cooperation. So among other sections of this report, we included a whole section on the impacts of Russia's full-scale war on Ukraine and what it has meant for science and technology cooperation. So in that report, that includes some, but not all of the ways in which U.S. science and technology departments and agencies are supporting Ukrainian researchers and the Ukrainian science and technology ecosystem. I'm not going to mention Smithsonian because you've already heard a lot about what Smithsonian is doing and about NASA. I will point out for our Department of Energy's Office of Science, they have provided supplemental funding to support students and scientists who are impacted by Russia's war. We are fortunate in that our Department of State has sponsored half dozen new programs ranging from exchange programs to virtual training for civil scientists with expertise in dual-use technologies, and also in fostering collaborations related to nuclear energy and other topics. And of course, we've heard, and I'm delighted that we continue to, as a US science and engineering community, work on additional ways to support researchers. I'm especially delighted about the National Academies announcement, and I look forward to supporting, because the announcement is wonderful, but it's not done yet. We still need to make sure that it launches well and that it actually provides support to Ukrainian scientists and engineers going forward. So, I mean, in all that, I think we have a framework and we have a vision for how we in the US science and engineering community continue to support with and be colleagues with our Ukrainian counterparts. And there's no single answer to that. But what I'm happy is that we have multiple answers, multiple approaches that I think will get us toward this future that we need, in which scientists and engineers and innovators from both nations can continue to innovate. And we hope leapfrog, and definitely a little bit of reinvention will be nice too. Thank you.
Nope. Yes. Yeah. As we think about what we're doing, I previewed a little bit in my opening remarks about we oversee the U.S. space sector, but we really focus a lot of our time on the intersection of sectors, and particularly between civil, commercial, and security. And particularly, commercial has become quite the powerful equity that we've been able to harness through all of our different sectors of NASA, NOAA, defense, and so on and so forth. And you think about what space does from an economic perspective. About a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, there was an assessment that came out from our Department of Commerce that said the U.S. space economic output, just the U.S., is $360 billion per year. And that roughly translates to 216,000 private sector jobs, to include our jobs. Not to include our jobs, I'm sorry, in the government as well. So it's quite a strong, powerful industry that even during uncertain economic times globally still maintains quite a vigilance. So one of the things that the National Space Council has been doing over the past 2 years now, 2.5 years, has been partnering closer with our private sector to be able to forge partnerships with our U.S. departments and agencies, but also to bring our industry with us around the world, or to be able to partner with our U.S. industry as we host, senior government level officials. Every state visit up to this point, to include the state visit by Prime Minister Kishida last week here in Washington, D.C., hosted by President Biden, has included space as not just a significant agenda item, but an area where we are showing growth and opportunity along the way. And that's allowed us to be able to provide for opportunities from human space exploration to earth science to be able to combat the climate crisis along the way. And so one of the things that we've really put a lot of our time into is how can our commercial space sector be an element of our broader diplomatic elements, efforts, initiatives going along the way. And I see nothing different in our opportunity to be able to cooperate as we rebuild, innovate, and leapfrog, with our partnership with respect to Ukraine. And you think about, we talked about connectivity and the opportunity for broadband, and I completely love the thought that this is not about devices. This is really about how do we connect societies together, whether we're talking about, of course, telemedicine, teleeducation, but really it's being able to bring good concrete content along the way. And as we think about rebuilding a communications architecture for all these different elements of our society, from education to all the different urban infrastructure needs, really have an opportunity to think about how do we leapfrog how we have historically been on the connectivity infrastructure. But also space can support us with infrastructure building as well, as we think about how we affect Ukraine's efforts to develop a more resilient a more modern infrastructure along the way. And for instance, the ability to be able to use space-based information for one area that's actually happening right now is use space-based information technology for the emergence of a more distributed power generation system in Ukraine to be able to leverage clean energy sources along the way. These are things that we can start with today using both civil, like NASA and NOAA and USGS capabilities, as well as commercial systems along the way. And finally, there's an opportunity to be able to capitalize on this innovation that's happening in the space sector commercially as well as globally along the way. In spite of the challenges that we all face here, and we know, space provides us a very interesting opportunity, not just for our governments to partner, but for, as you talked about, Oleksandr, our startups, our innovation ecosystems along the way. How can we take some of the best and brightest entrepreneurs, best and brightest scientists and engineers who have technologies that have applicability towards our society, merge them, meet with our industry along the way to be able to think about ways that maybe we can't even imagine today about of societal gains and benefits along the way. But what this is really going to require is both reimagining how our governments operate. You know, as NASA or as the Ukrainian Space Agency or as our industry, do we have the appropriate incentives, loans, grants, opportunities, even awareness that this is a sector that could be benefiting from all the different types of initiatives? I've been taking notes to what each person's been saying here, because each of those things that people have been saying here, whether we're talking about education grants, we're talking about clean energy bills, we're talking about anything, space has a component to these things. And the fact that we can bring more and more of our entrepreneurs into these dialogues is what we believe can really help flourish our bilateral cooperation. So we thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you for bringing policy and government innovations here, because nothing will happen if government is not flexible enough to work with innovations, with education and with science. Yeah, I think it will be challenging for Ukraine, but we already done a lot. Thank you very much. Greg, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks again. The U.S. National Academies, we're really proud and honored to have been working with Ukrainian scientists from the beginning of the war. And, you know, in terms of our theory of change, it's been evolving as we've learned as we go. You know, from the outset, Dr. McNutt, our president, started with two overarching principles. One was to think of ways to keep Ukrainian scientists connected with global science and technology. And number two, as she emphasized last night, not to keep a Ukrainian scientist connected with Ukraine. And she made that point very dramatically, where U.S. universities who were thinking of encouraging Ukrainian scientists to leave, she said, no, that's not consistent with our theory of change. We have to keep, and so as a result, in the early phases, we partnered with the Polish Academy of Sciences and established ways for Ukrainian scientists to work in Polish institutions to stay close. And at that point, it was primarily female scientists who had left Ukraine after the invasion. But our approach has changed as the circumstances. We're now supporting more and more researchers in Ukraine itself, and encouraging collaborative work with U.S. researchers and researchers in other parts of the world. And the latest evolution of the program is the Science and Innovation Fund that Dr. McNutt announced yesterday. And this really is, in addition to supporting scientists, it's focusing much more explicitly on rebuilding and applying science to engineering and technology. And we're thrilled by bringing in partners, the Simons Foundation, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and based on the very positive reaction yesterday, I think a host of other organizations that we met with yesterday to invest in the science and innovation needed to underpin development and to leapfrog technologies in a number of critical areas, including infrastructure, transportation, energy, agriculture, artificial intelligence, data science, and natural resources and earth sciences. So
yeah, thank you, Greg. And I think it's a very important thing that no one has answers for these complex questions. It's not an easy thing like how we can help Ukraine, how we can work together. This theory of change is really complicated. But this evolving approach, like we are talking, we are thinking together, we're bringing people who are doing different things here in the US and there in Ukraine, and exploring these needs and trying different models, how it can work. It brings us closer to better models. So it's a very innovative and reinventing approach. And also a little bit of personal story. When the war started, I've been at Stanford University, and then I came to DC just to try to find people who will think during the first months of the full-scale war about science, about researchers. And I wrote in LinkedIn to Kei, and I wrote in LinkedIn to Oleksandr Skorokhod, who is one of the leaders of the National Academy of Sciences, just saying, you know, I'm from Ukraine. I have 10 years in Ukraine science and innovation policy. I want to support my country. Let's talk. And they wrote me, okay. So I visited White House's OSTP. I've been at National Academy of Sciences, and I'm happy seeing that you are working on this, you are thinking about this, you are taking this seriously, and you're learning this, you know, maybe new country, new people, new approaches, because it's the way we can only cover together. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Draper.
Thank you very much. I'm going to focus on the partnerships angle. This is kind of baked into this question. And really, collaboration and cooperation has been part of NASA's DNA from the beginning, particularly after the Apollo era and things moved past the sort of Cold War, who's going to get there first kind of mindset. But today, we have evolved, to use your word, into something. We have a new program now at NASA called Artemis. And Chirag, thanks for not mentioning that, giving me that to talk about. Thank you very much. We did not rehearse this ahead of time, that's for sure. The Artemis program is, at its very heart, a collaboration, a cooperation, a coalition. We can't do this by ourselves. Artemis program is how NASA is going to help lead humanity back to the moon for the first time in over 50 years. The Artemis Accords is a currently non-binding but aspirational vehicle document that something like, what, 40 nations have now signed on to, Sweden most recently, I believe, just a few days ago. Ukraine was the 9th signatory to the Artemis Accords back in 2020, I believe it was. Things were starting to get really serious in discussions about Ukraine's role when other things intervened, and those discussions have now, of course, been on pause while geopolitical events play out. But the important thing I want to bring up about Artemis, the Artemis Accords, is that unlike the Apollo era, when it was just to NASA, just the United States, Artemis is about all of us. And I really want to say that clearly, all of us. Not just nations, not just companies, not just academia, all of us. Because, and this comes back to the idea of hope. You know, we're living in a time when it's hard to be hopeful some days, no question about it. But the way we, all of us, can take this next giant leap together, again, I come back to how I started. How can we talk about things like this when there is a war going on? But this is something to look toward, something we can all look toward, a better future. And the ability of Artemis and all of the things that have to happen. You know, I love to say when I'm talking about this, for every human being that flies in space, for every astronaut that actually makes it out there, there's at least 10,000, maybe 20,000 people on the ground who had to do their job right in order to make that possible. You know, when people talk about, well, why should we spend money on space when we have so many problems here at home? Well, of course, we're not shoveling cash into rockets and launching them into orbit. That money is being invested in our own future. And this, I want to draw a link to the first question here. That kind of investment is being done at the primary level, at the secondary level, at the graduate level. It is building the pipeline to bring us the future that we all want to enjoy. And so I really do hope, I hope that we will have hope from this. This is an opportunity that we humans have now in this point in time to take that next giant leap. And I know Ukraine will be part of it. I'm not qualified nor authorized by my agency to speak about specific agreements with specific nations. But this is absolutely what NASA is about. And we're ready to help. Thank you.
Thank you. I just as Ukrainian hope that while we all together leap into the moon, some countries which are undemocratic will just, do not do bad things, but maybe busy with themselves. Yeah. Thank you for bringing hope to our panel. Carol, we are again bringing back the primary education and STEM. You shared a little bit of theory of change. Maybe you want to add a little.
So it's interesting because I mentioned how, at the Smithsonian Science Education Center, we've been working on this for 40 years. How do you transform education through science, but in collaboration with communities across the globe? And why is that second part there? And that's our mission statement, by the way, is because of the fact that science is so international, so global. So we actually have a theory of change that we established in the 1990s, which is simply a framework for collaborating and for helping scientific change happen within school systems. And we call it LASER, Leadership and Assistance for Science Education Reform. And the thinking is that no matter what region you are in the world, and this LASER infrastructure is used everywhere across the globe. And so the question is no matter where you are, what is your approach to educational change in your region? What matters to you most? We heard about that this morning, about the importance of community-based needs. So the first part of this theory of change is understand what your needs are within your community. The second is, of course, understand what exists in the research that tells us about why students learn in certain ways and how do you translate that research into meaningful experiences for teachers and students. Once you've established that understanding of what drives your needs locally, you understand the research base, much of which comes out of the National Academies or other important organizations that we were hearing from today. The next thing is that you have to put in place the just basic pieces of education. I mentioned some of these. Curriculum, so educational resources that teachers will use to drive the teaching and learning of science. And because many of our teachers of science, especially in our elementary schools or primary schools, who are teaching students 5 to 10, their expertise may not be in science. So how do you provide them with instructional resources that will support the building of their knowledge of science while they're simultaneously teaching students much more advanced science? Again, back to this idea of leapfrogging. So the first is some type of instructional resources. The second is the support that teachers need to build their own knowledge and skills. If they're going to help our students advance, they too need to develop their own skills. The third is the physical stuff. So at the Smithsonian, we have 154 million objects in our collection. Some of them we shouldn't have in our collection, and we're trying to give them back. But there are objects that are used to drive learning. Objects evoke memories in people. They are experiential. And so we need to give students stuff so that they can experiment with science. And that's probably one of the most expensive things that we're going to be trying to do, is figure out where can that stuff come from to get them into students' hands. And then finally, the last two pieces of this LASER model are community support. So we need to know who in Ukraine are the educational leaders. Save Ed is a fantastic example. The Junior Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, another example. The ministry itself. Who are the educational leaders and experts in Ukraine who understand the context for learning in Ukraine? The Smithsonian can't do that. It has to come from the local community. And then finally, we have to study whether what we're doing is working. So Anna mentioned the PISA. Ultimately, for accountability purposes, we need to know that we're actually helping students build their scientific knowledge, their critical thinking skills, their problem-solving skills, and their ability to understand scientific phenomenon in solving problems. And so we have to study whether that actually works. Once we put that infrastructure in place, and again, this is our theory of change, it should lead to improved pedagogical approaches for teachers, improved student understanding of science, and then ultimately a more scientifically literate citizenry. And that's the goal. So you in terms of so that's our theory of change, but your second question around partnerships and international collaboration, let's learn from each other. It's taken us 40 years to establish this, to study it, to make certain that it works. And now other countries are embracing it. And that's the goal now, is with the Ukraine and the Ministry of Education and Science, share that knowledge freely.
Thank you, Carol. It sounds beautiful. Anna.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be quick. So the theory of change of what we do at SafeEd is basically an answer to the question, what kind of recovery and when this recovery should happen. And, there is a recovery after the victory, but there's also recovery of services while the war is ongoing. And this is a very important point for our international partners to understand and try to play with it. And this is what we do at SafeEd, trying to restore access to education, taking into account the needs and possibilities of very different communities. When we are talking about access, what you can do in the Kharkiv region is very different from what you can do in the Kyiv region. In Kyiv region that is liberated, and by the way, thanks to you, has much better anti-missile system, is now very much open to a innovative rebuilding of schools. Whereas in the Kharkiv area, in the entire Kharkiv region, you can only do underground education for years to come. So we have to build huge bomb shelters, huge underground schools, and basically this is what we do at SafeEd. In Kyiv region, we rebuild schools, we repurpose, if everything is destroyed, we repurpose cultural houses into schools. In Mykolaiv region, in order to renew access to education, we had to dig out 12 big wells and install water purification systems because Russia hid the infrastructure, so schools had no water. In Kharkiv region, we only do underground education, or in the bordering regions of Belarus and Russia. So there are very different ways how you can do that, but we have to do that now, because it is a recovery of not of physical buildings, but of services. And this is what's important. The second theory of change point is very much focusing on youth and engaging them. I'll just briefly share with you a story of a little town of Kachuzhanka. It's Kyiv region. Russians had a headquarters of their Battle of Kyiv there. Their generals were based there. And very ironically, in the same cabinet, in the same classroom where a Russian general was based, now one of our youth program members, we have a youth program called UActive, they've developed a STEM center. They recycle plastic, and then based on certain models that they are given, they produce, and don't be afraid, they produce parts for drones and parts for prosthesis institutions in Ukraine. You might ask, and then they send it to the front line and to medical facilities. You might say, wow, kids are doing that. Yeah, I wouldn't want our kids to do that, but also these kids lived in occupation and saw how their classmates were gunshot on the streets by Russians. So, and they, in that sense, they feel engaged for the upcoming victory, and they want to stay there, and they want to live there. So, and the last thing I would say, we have to, with regard to partnerships and STEM, I see it completely possible in one of those underground schools that are now being built, arranging in different regions, including in Kharkiv. By the way, Kharkiv, 57,000 of school children are there now. Kharkiv is bombed every day with ballistics. It takes 30 seconds for a missile to reach the city. Not a single anti-missile probably can help that, but 50,000 kids. So what do we want for this city? For them all to leave or somehow adapt? This is a very serious question. So arranging, for instance, big STEM centers underground and engaging kids in that manner towards learning, I think it's a way to go. And the last thing, I think what we definitely should learn from the United States, I know some of you might have different opinions, but these are the charter schools. The state and the local governments are not able to deal with that amount of recovery, with that amount of resumption of schools, with the scale of damage. Thus, we need legal engagement of other players, non-governmental players into the recovery of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Oleksandr.
Yes, let me also be very brief. Now I would like to tell you about Science at Risk project, which I also represent together with Julia. This project was established in April 2023, and the aim of the project was to help Ukrainian scientists to be heard among world community, to help to save and to restore Ukrainian science. And we could tell you much more about this project after this panel session, because we'll have open house and some science at risk exhibition in Ukrainian house. So in particular, I participated in a group focused on human capital. And we have found that a lot of Ukrainian scientists, even been here for a lot of time abroad, they would like and they are ready to cooperate. For instance, from our survey, which was one of the biggest survey starting from Ukrainian independence among scientific diaspora, we received the data that 96% of Ukrainian scientific diaspora ready to cooperate with Ukrainian collaborators. But of course, now we have a lot of obstacles which prevent this collaboration, starting from safety reasons, then lack of infrastructure, so on. So for now, our theory of changes mostly based in what I have said in previous part of discussion, that we need to preserve our human capital. We need to foster our international collaboration, especially with Ukrainian scientific diaspora, which is huge capital in many countries, not only in US. And what we are going to do now, we are trying to start to establish an organization of Ukrainian scientific diaspora, which will help, from one hand, scientific diaspora itself to establish network and connections, and from another hand, to establish different fruitful connections with Ukrainian scientists, with Ukrainian business, with American business as well, and American institutions. So this is our theory of change, that you need to believe in human potential, human capacity, but of course, except believe, you need to invest in human capacity, and you need to put effort to build all these networks among humans to make it fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to say great thank you for my panel, because we spent here 90 minutes. We covered so much in one panel, and I think we managed it to show this multidimensional, complex, but still very urgent and very important for today and for future angle on Ukraine Reinvent, Innovate, Leapfrog. That education and science is something which is happening today, which is definitely strongly needed to win the war, to win the peace, to ensure Ukraine's future. And definitely, I think our great international partners and friends showcased that there is so much for us to be done together, to share this knowledge, to share this expertise, and to innovate together, because I think it will be helpful not only for Ukraine to become, to have victory, to become resilient leader of the region and good partner for the US and other democratic countries, but it will help all the world to get some new knowledge, to become more resilient, to know that we are all prepared to the situations of risk and we can act together effectively and in a smart way. So let's thank panel. And also, as we are the last panel of the first annual Ukraine Innovation Days, I want to thank you, all our guests, our team of Ukraine House, the team of Embassy of Ukraine, to Ambassador Oksana Markarova, to all the people who were engaged in our event as speakers, moderators who supported us. I think it's so important to have today these conversations and to highlight that the tragedy of Ukraine, of having such a neighbor, of being a center of a full-scale war, shouldn't prevent us from thinking together, reinventing together, and innovating together. Hope to see you next year. I hope we will discuss post-war recovery, and we will be much more prepared to share a lot of hopeful, great things we've done during the year and to hopefully talk about the future. Thank you very much. Enjoy the open day in Ukraine House.